Farm Bureau. D1 Baseball's Kendall Rogers joins us right now. Kendall, we had a weird night in college baseball last night. For a random Tuesday in mid-April, there were some upsets and maybe some eyebrow-raising results.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I'll look no further than Tennessee. I mean, you're talking about a team that's certainly been scuffling as of late, but you look at the Vols, they lose a midweek game to Tennessee Tech, and all of a sudden they're actually down to 39 in the RPI with a 5-10 league record. So Tennessee is, I mean, we're approaching the territory where a team like Tennessee is really kind of getting a must-win territory in terms of the weekend. Like, they got to start winning some games in the SEC. And I think the other kind of surprising result, obviously, was Indiana State 10-1 over Vandy. But I'll tell you what, Mitch Hannes does a really nice job at Indiana State. I mean, that's been a really solid program the last few years. You know, they have an athletic director in Sherrod Clean-Skills who, you know, is on the committee, played college baseball. He really cares about college baseball. And, you know, you look at Indiana State, and they're right there like 13 or 14 in the RPI. So that one wasn't as surprising, but, boy, Tennessee is on the rift a little bit.
All right, so new postseason projections are out, and you had an addition to the field of 64 that raised some eyebrows here in the state of Mississippi. You got Mississippi State in the field. I'm assuming that is you projecting how the Bulldogs are going to finish, and based on what you've seen the last two weekends. Is that right?
Yeah, I feel better about him. And honestly, a lot of it was what Mark Etheridge thought about him, too. You know, he was in Starkville last weekend. I think we all kind of feel like, you know, Mississippi State might be starting to figure out the bullpen a little bit. Aaron Nixon, I thought, threw some very meaningful pitches, some very meaningful innings for them over the weekend. So they're starting to figure out the back end of the bullpen. They're starting to get some big hits offensively. Obviously, Dakota Jordan is really blossoming into that guy that we all thought he would be coming into the season. And I think the biggest thing is, again, like you said, we are projecting. Right now, if you look at their overall resume, you're kind of like, maybe not. But, I mean, if you look ahead and you project they're playing a wounded Tennessee team and things like that, you know, you can feel a little bit better about it down the stretch. And so, I mean, right now we kind of feel like they'll be right there on the bubble and they'll find their way in. What's really ironic about Mississippi State, Richard, is the fact that they might be one of the teams that are like Ole Miss last year and in reverse, in the sense that, you know, they were supposed to be good. They started out awful, but they got it together, whereas like Ole Miss last year started out pretty good, was awful in the middle of the season, and then, you know, obviously was very good in the postseason. So the simple fact that Ole Miss won the national championship last year, as crazy as it sounds, could actually really help a team like Mississippi State who, you know what, they may have a lot of work in their resume, but guess what? They're an SEC team. They're talented. We could see them make a run. Just look at their rivals last year. So it's kind of ironic how that may work out for Mississippi State this year.
You know, you look at Ole Miss right now, Kendall, 3-12 in the league. That's the worst record in the entire SEC. And it's fair, I think, at this point to say Ole Miss in the postseason, I'm not talking about Hoover, I'm talking about in a regional, is a long shot. But I do think there's still a roadmap. It's just kind of a winding
100%.
road, and there is very, very little margin for error. 10-5 is what they got to do in the second half, though, right? I mean, don't they have to get to 13 league wins if they're going to get there?
Yeah, I think this year in the SEC, with how good this conference is right now, I think 13 wins will absolutely get teams in this year. The problem is just getting there. I mean, and it starts this week, and what Ole Miss is going to have to do, they're going to have to do something on a weekend that people aren't necessarily expecting. And the last I had heard, it sounds like Hunter Elliott might actually throw a little bit this weekend. You know, maybe that is kind of the addition. They kind of just, you know, put the charge on this team, kind of gives them that little kick in the butt that they kind of needed here the last few weeks. And what's so strange about Ole Miss in general is the Rebels have 3 wins in conference play, and if Elliott can throw it all for them, they're a team that if they were in a regional, like you could legitimately see them winning a regional because they still have a premier lineup. They just need a bell cow on the mound to kind of get them going, you know, pitching-wise.
Of the teams that are sitting at 5-10 right now, that's Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi State, and Auburn. You obviously have got Mississippi State in the field, Auburn kind of right there on the edge. Yeah. Tennessee is still in. Which of those 5-10 teams is most likely to really get it together in the second half?
I mean, I get that it's weird to believe in them right now, but I mean, Tennessee's got to wake up at some point, right? I mean, this is a team with Chase Dolander, Chase Burns, Drew Beam, Kirby Cannell on the back end, Andrew Lindsey on the back end. Like you got to feel like they're going to figure it out. Like Chase Burns is not going to finish an SEC season with an ERA around 12. Like I just don't see how that's possible. I mean, I guess at this point you got to believe it's possible, but I just have a feeling Tennessee wakes up at some point. But I do feel like this weekend is kind of like their last stand. Like they're pinned up in a corner of a battle. This is like their final stand, and if they lose a series of Vandy, I think they're in massive trouble. But on the other side of things, maybe it's kind of like Mississippi State with Ole Miss last week. Maybe getting a rival is kind of what this team needs right now. And so ask me next week what I think about that, because my answer could be vastly different. But for now, I'll stick with Tennessee.
And the 5 weekends remaining are Vanderbilt at home, Mississippi State at home, Georgia on the road, Kentucky at home, and then they finish out at South Carolina.
Yeah, not easy.
No, it certainly is not. And, I mean, it's far more difficult than it looked like it was going to be in February. So let's go to the top of the league. Vanderbilt at 13-2, Florida at 11-4, South Carolina 10-4, Kentucky 10-5. That's all in the East. And then Arkansas 11-4, LSU 9-5. You got 5 national seeds or 5 top 8s right now. Who falls out of that group over the second half of conference play?
Oh, boy. Out of those 5 teams, I mean, honestly, as insane as it sounds, like you really and truly could see 5 SEC top 8 seeds. I believe that.
I don't disagree.
Here's the problem. So here's the issue you run into if you're the committee. If there is a team within striking distance, you can find a pathway for that team. For instance, Stanford would be the one to upset the apple cart on that scenario, because Stanford could win the Pac-12, their RPI could be top 10, and then you're looking at them going, okay, they're a West Coast team and they're top 8 seed worthy. The problem you run into right now is that Stanford and Oregon are borderline. The Big 12 does not have a single team right now that you would have as a top 8 seed. Texas certainly is not there yet. Oklahoma State's down in the mid-30s now. TCU's RPI is nearing 50. So you don't have a Big 12 team. Texas Tech's RPI is in the 60s. So you don't have a Big 12 team. The American right now, we have East Carolina as the national seed, but go look at the Americans' RPI. There's not one below 100, and what that means East Carolina is pretty much going to have to run the table in that conference, or their RPI is going to go down, down, down. And so, in that scenario, let's say the Big 12 continues to have no one that they can pick up off base. Let's say the American just becomes an absolute drag on East Carolina's RPI. Like, where are your other national seeds going to come from, other than Virginia and Wake Forest? Like, there's just not a lot of options right now. So I think right now, predicting the SEC to get 5 top 8 actually isn't remotely crazy. It's reality. Does that mean things can't change? Absolutely not.
Why is LSU still number 1?
I still believe in their offense. I will say this. I think when you look at the teams around them in college baseball, I think Wake Forest 100% has a claim to be number 1 over them. I think Wake Forest right now is playing better. I think Wake Forest right now is more balanced. But, LSU is one of those teams it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but they're still winning. It was kind of funny. I was on Matt Moscona's show a couple of weeks ago in Baton Rouge, and he asked the same question, why do you have us ranked number 1? And it kind of reminds me, and my example to him was the year that LSU beat Alabama at football. I remember it was 9-6. It was like the ugliest game you could ever imagine for a big game.
Yeah,
I think it was all field goals. It was horrible. And I equated the LSU's baseball team to that. You know what? LSU's that team that's winning all these big series, and guess what? You know what? It's ugly, but they're still doing it. And so for me, until they stop doing it, they deserve to be number 1.
Does the fact that they have not swept anybody bother you?
If you win. Do what?
Does the fact that they haven't swept anybody bother you?
It doesn't bother me for rankings. It worries me for those guys come postseason time, because I do think LSU is one of those teams, unlike Wake, that at the end of the year, if they lose that game in a regional, they are in trouble. They're going to have to outslug somebody. I guess the good thing is they can pretty much outslug anybody in the country if they want to. Yeah. But there's no doubt the pitching staff's a question mark for me right now, 100%.
It's really disappointing that we don't get LSU Florida in the regular season this year.
I know, right? It's terrible.
And
that would be interesting.
We don't get LSU Vandy in the regular season this year either.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Florida. Florida and South Carolina are the other two teams for me. I mean, South Carolina, to me, looks like a top 2 or 3 team. Obviously, they're number 6 because of Vandy and some others. But, they're really good. I think Florida, when you look at CAGs and you look at their overall lineup, you look at their rotation, I mean, they're a team that I can see win the national championship. In other words, the top of the SEC is really, really good.